Hello.
Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. It is so good to see everybody. Are you all getting in the Christmas spirit, ready to be jolly? I am.
Okay.
Hence the red.
Excellent. Well, good. You can all do all the decorating then. That's awesome.
Always.
Yeah.
Always.
So if we're not careful, we're going to make a habit out of this. We're back again for a third week in a row.
We are, and feeling good. And we're back. Was it 2 weeks ago? A link came across my desk, and I don't even know who sent it. It might have actually been Hans that sent it. So thank you, Hans. And it was a documentary, The Descent into Madness. And people send me documentaries all the time, and my life is insanely crazy, personally crazy, professionally crazy, and then I'm always researching. But for whatever reason, I thought I'm going to watch this, and I was pleasantly surprised that it was James Corbett, and I was so excited. By the end of it, I actually went on Instagram and did a live and showed, I think it was about a 6 to 8 minute piece of the documentary. I was so excited because not only was it talking about the descent into madness, but it also had a domino effect out. And it's something that I've been talking about, and then Chris joined me talking about for the last 3, 4, 5 years, actually, about the power of one. And I was so excited because there it was. They didn't call it the power of one, but they did call it the circuit breaker effect. And I was so excited that I immediately sent James Corbett an email. And he is such a kind, generous man that he responded. And he has agreed to be on the show to talk about his documentary released, I believe, September of this year, called Dissent into Madness. If you haven't watched it, please do, because that is what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Well, that was a hell of an intro. Please welcome our special guest, Mr. James Corbett. Hello, James.
Hello, guys. Good to be here again. Thank you for having me on. I'm ready to be jolly. I don't know about you guys.
I am.
Yeah. Depends on the moment. That's it. So Jody watches a lot of documentaries. I can take them or leave them at this point. You know, we've done so much research. It's like, tell me something new. But where you had me, honestly, she's like, watch this. Where you had me was I heard Descent into Madness, and then you'd spelled it Dissent, and I'd like, oh, I'm in right now, right on the title, and it was good. It was a good deep dive into stuff that I know for a fact goes on in Canada as well. So.
Yeah, what I was surprised though was when you got into the stats of psychopaths and how many psychopaths there actually are in the world. And you mentioned 4%. And I really didn't think it was that high.
I didn't think it was that low, to be honest with you.
And then you went into explaining what psychopaths are and the behaviors and the traits. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I know a bunch of those, including our governments. I just thought your documentary was so well done, and I'm so glad you've given us time to talk about it and find out what you've been up to, and what made you decide that this was the next project for you to release.
Well, thank you for all of that. That's very gratifying to hear, and it's especially gratifying that you liked the wordplay of the title, because I was quite tickled with that when I first thought of it. And in some ways, perhaps that's the sort of organizing principle of the entire documentary and what it's really about. Because, of course, turning dissent into a form of madness, as in you're crazy if you question the government, is obviously a trick that the pathocrats, the psychopaths at the top of this system, love to play. But also, yes, there is the other side of this, the fact that dissent, the reason why they are so afraid of dissent is because that is precisely what undermines their presumed would-be authority. So there's a lot to dig in there, including those, horrifying statistics about the number of people in the world who are afflicted with various forms of psychopathy, sociopathy. There are different definitions for these terms. There is no universally agreed upon definition, or there is a relatively standard test, a clinical test that can be delivered to assess one's gradation on a spectrum, and if you were over a certain number, you can be designated as psychopathic. But it's still less of a hard science than I think some people would like. But at any rate, it certainly does indicate, and this is something that the average person has a very, very hard time wrapping their head around, that there are people who literally do not have the sense of empathy that you and me and the average person listening to this conversation has, to have any sense of remorse or guilt or even just empathy for other people in positions where they are being put in pain or in distress. And the fact that there are people walking around with the ice water flowing through their veins is something that is doubly disturbing, because not only does it mean, of course, that these people are walking around and that they do not care, for example, if they have to torture you in whatever way in order to get what they want, but it also means that these people can essentially put on the mask of sanity, as it has been called by some, and pretend to empathize with you. I feel your pain, and get people on board with them because, hey, I'm a normal human being. I feel sympathy, and this person understands what I'm going through. And so I will put my trust and faith in this person, and people can be misled and deceived through that. So what ultimately results from this is what I've called the pathocracy, ruled by psychopaths, sociopaths, essentially some of the worst people imaginable. And it's a situation that unfortunately far too few people understand at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, last time we were bantering global terms for these, psychopaths, and last time you said technocrats was your thing, and now you're the pathocrats. I love pathocrats, by the way. It's so appropriate. It is now fast become one of my favorite terms. So
well, and also to know
those are not mutually exclusive labels, by the way. One can certainly be a technocrat.
This is true.
I would imagine there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah. Exactly. But also when you said that the majority of psychopaths end up in careers of politics and economics, and I thought, well, who's running the world right now? The politicians and the bankers. So it totally makes sense what we're experiencing and what we're going through. And as you just said, these people don't empathize the same way that we do. They don't have the same kind of compassion triggers that we do, which allows them to basically commit genocide without even blinking an eye, or to have people who try and tell the truth and who try to dissent or rebel against the agenda, why they don't think twice about throwing them into psych wards. And again, without batting an eye, and people like us that sort of have a moral code, we have a hard time understanding how somebody could be so cruel, because we do have a moral compass. We do have compassion. So yeah, I thought that was really, really interesting. When we talk about monsters like Hitler and Stalin and Lenin and Trudeau, we just think they're monsters, but there's an actual name for it and an agenda that they have. It's amazing.
Yes, and let me just back up what you're saying there. I cite a number of data points along those lines, but one of them, a study by Ryan Murphy at the Southern Methodist University in 2018, where he did a study that showed that the highest prevalence of personality traits corresponding to psychopathy in the continental U.S. resided in Washington, D.C. So again, this is not speculation. It is documentable fact.
Right. Yeah. I wonder if it's, they're much more comfortable just, treating people like numbers. And so that's all they see. They see the wave of numbers and that's it. And they have no problem not attaching people to that. And I think they're probably much more comfortable at that macro level for that reason.
That raises an important point, because of course there are the literal born psychopaths who are literally born with the inability to empathize with other human beings. But there are also, again, there are various ways of defining this, but I think of the psychopaths as being the people who are born that way versus sociopaths who essentially start to adopt the practices of the psychopaths. And there are a number of researchers who talk about this. One of them, Philip Zimbardo, who ran the Stanford prison experiment, who also talked about and testified with regards to the Abu Ghraib abuses, and how did these ordinary, boys and girls from the Midwest or Kansas or wherever suddenly get shipped over to Iraq and start becoming these sadistic, torturing abusers? How does that happen? Well, of course, this is not to take away the agency of those people and the responsibility for what they did, but when people are steeped in certain conditions and certain structures, power structures, where they are incentivized and promoted and rewarded and protected for being sadistic, they will tend to, more often than not, adopt the sadistic ideas and policies of their pathocratic rulers. And I think that's what is happening writ large in society. I mean, if we see a disintegration in the sort of the moral framework of the society we're living in, I think that rot starts at the top, and people are being incentivized and shown that the way to get ahead is to comply harder with the government and to rat on your neighbors. And, oh, I saw somebody who he didn't take the vaccine, therefore we must get rid of them, et cetera, et cetera. People can be incentivized to adopt the unempathetic ideas of their rulers. And in a way, that's even more disturbing, because yes, the 4% of psychopaths certainly can do a lot of damage, but they're definitely helped by the whatever percentage of sociopaths who come along in their wake and do their bidding for them.
Yeah, we saw that. It was all too prevalent. When COVID happened and trauma hits, people tribed up immediately, and they were merciless to the other tribe. And it's just case in point. It wasn't relegated to those upper echelons. It showed you just how quickly people will abandon civility in favor of minor, you being able to go on vacations or just virtual signaling to a tribe, right?
Yeah, I know we all keep saying, this didn't have to happen. If the police had said no, if the doctors had said no, if the nurses had said no, and yet they all said yes. And, we're sitting here on the sidelines going, how can they say yes? They've got eyes, they've got ears, they're educated folks. These are their brothers, their sisters, their friends. How can they do this? And when you went into this secondary psychopath explanation, I'm like, got it.
Yes. So that is both the disturbing part, but also that hopeful part that you were talking about that comes towards the end of the documentary, because they are related phenomenon. And we can talk about, for example, the experimental basis that shows that people are to some extent malleable, that in their psyche, that they can be at the very least peer pressured into going along with group consensus. And we could look, for example, at the Asch conformity experiment. For people who've never looked at that experiment, it's been done in a number of different permutations, but one famous example, you'd have a bunch of people sitting in a room, all of whom would be participants, active actors in the study, who know that they are part of the study, one of whom would be the actual study subject, the person that doesn't know that that everyone else in the room is essentially lying. And they would line them up, and they would show them, for example, two lines on a piece of paper, and which one is longer. And one of them is clearly longer than the other. But they found time after time, when every single other person in the group says, oh no, the shorter one is actually longer. By the time it gets to the person who is the actual subject of the study, they'll more often than not go along with it, even if they know and they believe and they see the actual self-evident reality in front of them. In order not to disturb the group consensus, they will say what everyone else is saying. Oh yeah, the short line is actually the longer line, or whatever it is. And that has been experimentally verified. So people are malleable in that way. They will go along with what they perceive to be the group consensus, which of course puts a gigantic idea in the minds of would-be manipulators of society, the people that Edward Bernays wrote about in his 1928 book on propaganda, where he said that those who manipulate the conscious and the habits and opinions of society are the unseen real rulers of society. He was writing about that a century ago, and how much more true is it today? Well, obviously, because again, if people can be made to literally see things that they don't see, or invert reality, or at least lie in order to go along with group consensus, then of course, if they can control the media and what these are the acceptable opinions. You can have this opinion or that opinion, and you get to choose. What about this opinion? No, you can't. You don't even think that. So again, the people are malleable in that way. And that has been further confirmed, of course, by the Milgram experiment, which
Yes.
I assume most people have heard about, right? So the Milgram experiment, a classic experiment, was conducted by Stanley Milgram. And it was an attempt to explain how, it was post-World War II. How did all of these, normal German people go along with this tyranny? But let's talk about in any tyrannical situation, how do people go along with tyranny and become serviceable puppets in a tyrannical regime? Well, his idea was to set up an experiment where you have, again, the actual subject of the experiment comes in and is greeted by somebody in the white lab coat with a clipboard, the professor who's running an experiment. It's about learning. And what it is we're randomly assigning people. You're going to be a teacher, and this other person is going to be a learner. And we're going to see if we can essentially improve their ability to memorize names and dates and whatever. And so they split up into separate rooms, and the teacher, who is the actual subject of the study, gets to communicate with this learner through some sort of intercom system. They're talking to each other essentially through microphones. And the idea is you're going to ask this person some questions. You're going to tell this person some, whatever it is, names or dates or whatever it is, words that they have to memorize. And then you're going to quiz them on it. And when they get something wrong, you're going to deliver an electric shock to that person. And it starts off at a very small voltage that is just sort of a minor shock. And the person goes, ow, that hurt. And as it progresses, the person on the other side, the person that they can't see, the learner in this experiment, who's actually Confederate of the professor, is more and more, oh my God, ow, that really hurts. Oh, my heart, I can't stand it. And they have to proceed to a point where they are delivering shocks that are strong enough. It's labeled literally on the instrument that they're using to deliver the shocks. It's labeled as potentially lethal. And the idea was, how many of these people will go through to the actual end of this experiment and deliver what they believe could be an actually lethal shock to this complete stranger based on nothing other than a person with a clipboard telling them to proceed. And before they ran the experiment, most of the people that Milgram polled, his students and his colleagues, they thought it would be something like 10% or 15%. Well, it turned out to be upwards of 80, 90% of the participants in the study would proceed to the lethal shock level. Again, based on nothing other than someone that they thought was a professor telling them. And they had a script that they were supposed to read. And so it was delivered the exact same way every time. Something like, the experiment requires that you proceed, or the experiment requires that you continue. And they would, 90% of them would continue all the way up to the lethal level. That's the Milgram experiment. And I've seen people try to poo-poo or dismiss it, but it's not one experiment that was run once. It's been run many, 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 many times over the decades, various researchers in various countries, and they've all come to similar results. But, and this is the hopeful but, the part of the Milgram experiment that most people do not know is that Milgram himself ran the experiment, I think something like 20 different variations of the experiment, 20 different times, 20 different cohorts of people in various permutations. So sometimes it would be on Yale campus. They would actually have it set up, and the person would be dressed in the white lab coat with a clipboard, and it would seem very professional and intimidating. Sometimes they would hire a room in a ratty, rundown office building somewhere downtown, and they'd have someone who's just dressed in regular street clothes who's delivering the experiment, etc. They tried all sorts of permutations and found that, well, actually, you could get different levels of compliance. Sometimes it would be the 90% of people would go to the lethal level of shocks. Sometimes it would be much lower. And they found that in one particular permutation of this experiment, the compliance went down to something like 10% of people, with 90% of people refusing to go along with the experiment. And what was that permutation? That was when the person who's coming in and is being randomly assigned as the teacher in this experiment sees someone ahead of them who is also taking this, going through this, and they are the teacher and they get to watch them. And that person says at some point as they're delivering the shocks, no, I'm not going to go for it. I'm not going to continue this. I'm done, and leaves the room. And in that case, compliance dropped down to 10%. And from that point on, very few people would actually go forward to the supposedly potentially lethal level of electric shock. I should let people know, of course, this was all a setup and no one was actually getting shocked. But anyway, the point is that people believe they are delivering shocks. And that is so important. And it's such a crazy part of this whole Milgram experiment that many people have heard of the Milgram experiment. Almost nobody has heard about that part of the Milgram experiment, that compliance almost completely vanishes once people see someone disobeying orders. They are much, much more likely to disobey orders. And that, to me, is what I call the circuit breaker, the power of one, whatever you want to call it. It is the documentable flip side of that Asch conformity experiment. Yes, if everybody is lying, then you'll lie to maintain the peace with other people around you. But even if you see one or two other people who are standing up and saying, no, clearly that line A is much shorter than line B, or whatever the case may be, you are much more likely to tell the truth and to stand up for what you know is the truth. And that's exactly why political dissent is anathema to these would-be authoritarians. That's why they have to clamp down on it as strongly as they do, because they know that just the model, just seeing somebody else modeling dissent, is that fire in the minds of men that cannot be put out by bullets or straitjackets or anything else.
Yeah, I was so pleased when you said that, because I didn't know that part of the experiment. And I also didn't know, and that gives me immense hope, but I also didn't know that when they took the experiment out of what appeared to be a doctor's office or a university lab and just put it in an office building, the amount of people that complied went down to 42% as well. So it sort of gave us an insight into what humans trust. If the person's in a lab coat and it's in the hospital, I can trust them. Therefore, 92% said, yes, I'll hit that button over and over and over again. But as soon as you put it in an atmosphere that's not normal for experiments, say, to happen in, all of a sudden people started to mistrust and started to question why they would do this, and they started pulling back. But then the ultimate, one person says no, and it gives permission for everybody else to now say no. And that explains why those in government leadership authority-like positions in the world today have clamped down so hard on social media, on protests, on rallies, and censored anyone who was talking truth or anyone who was talking against or giving options against the actual agenda the last 5 years more specifically, but obviously since the beginning of time, as your documentary went into, which was amazing. It explains so much when you see that 10% of the Milgram study, it explains so much. And then you went into Ceausescu, the one man in the crowd that booed. And all of a sudden the crowd went from cheering for Ceausescu to booing as well. And then this huge overturn of the government, which I'm like, when is that happening? I'm waiting now for that to happen here in Canada.
Yeah. And again, it's almost a fable-like tale, isn't it? It's the emperor wears no clothes. Again, it takes the one little boy who tells the truth in the crowd, and suddenly this entire regime comes crumbling down. And it sounds fantastic, but it actually can happen. It actually has happened. And presumably, as long as there are still truth tellers who are able to tell the truth in a public way, it will continue to happen, and tyrants understand that. And as you say, that's exactly why they crack down on it. In fact, very specifically with regards to the scamdemic, we know about Event 201. One of the things that preoccupied them during Event 201 was talking about messaging, and how do we get the messaging towards people in a way that they'll go along and comply with medical interventions. And one of the things that they were talking about was, ludicrously enough, I think, they talked about, well, most people trust their bosses, so we need to get corporate, CEOs and things on board with messaging. I thought, really? Do most people trust their bosses on medical interventions, etc.? I don't know. But you raised a good point with regards to the Milgram experiment. So, again, when they held it on Yale campus with the professor in the lab coat with the clipboard, looking very professional, 92% compliance. And again, precisely because one of the professions that people have always held in high esteem and always trusted was doctor. If it's a doctor, then I trust his opinion. That has always been a very, very strong opinion that a lot of people had. And that's precisely, I think, why the scamdemic was the scamdemic, is because you know, it's not about Trudeau or any other politician. It's listen to the doctors, and the doctors are telling us. Fauci is the science, don't you know?
Right.
Yes.
So that's why there was such mass compliance. But I would be interested to see today what the feelings are today, because obviously a lot more people are aware. Oh, you know what? Maybe doctors aren't infallible people floating on clouds. Maybe they shouldn't be trusted. At any rate, again, when people become aware of things like the Milgram experiment and that, they can at least start to consciously think about these things. Well, how am I being manipulated? And why am I trusting someone just because they're wearing a lab coat? Shouldn't I be actually examining the evidence that they're talking about?
Yeah, and that's the part I found really interesting, is that how much is placed on perceived credibility. And that's the whole thing. When it went into that office space, the credibility went down. And what we did see over the past 4 years is all these trusted professions, like you mentioned, the credibility is gone with a lot of them, with the legal system, with judges, with doctors, with police, with politicians. Sure, there's always going to be people who believe till the end of their days. You know, there were 50 years later, people were still saying the Nazis were misunderstood, you know, that sort of thing, right? So that will never change. There will always be people who always champion and cheerlead for. But I'd say there is a lot of reorganization with people's trust and credibility after this. So I personally don't think they could pull this off again, because it wouldn't go as well as it did last time for them personally. So they've got to do something different.
Like maybe if they released an actual real bioweapon that was actually killing people, people might, you know. Who knows? But at any rate, yes, I think you're right.
Don't give them any ideas.
Well, yes.
Well, they've done it.
They did that unfortunately, I doubt that they haven't thought about that. But no, you're exactly right. I think that trust has been undermined in a certain way, and in a good sense, because at the very least, I would like to think that more of the public would at the very least demand proof, or at least take a look at some of the evidence before they willingly lock themselves in a cage and don the mask and take the genetic intervention, etc. And again, none of this was news or surprise to anyone who was paying attention. And actually, for example, it still boggles me that people are, even to this day, just finding out. Do you know that they never said that the vaccines were going to stop any transmission of anything? Yeah, I know that because I read the original results of the original trials back in 2020 when they were first publishing them. That's exactly what it said. It's just you weren't, I guess, looking at the evidence. You were just listening to what the talking heads were telling you.
Exactly.
Well, exactly. And, you know, where I went through every time Trudeau talked about getting the jab, he never once said it was safe and effective. He always, every single time, said Health Canada says it's safe and effective. But Tam never said that. Not one time did she ever say that. And so even one time he says, you know, safe and effective. And Michelle Rempel-Garner is supposed to be on the other side. She goes, don't you mean your doctor? And he said, oh, yes, I mean my doctor. Don't ever listen to a politician, he says. So they were very careful with their legal out on that one. So.
Yeah, it's crazy. But you know, talking about the censorship, you know, when you start looking at who all was censored, you know, all these doctors, journalists, you know, you brought up about Sweeney and Thomas Binder and Dr. Meryl Nass, and how not only were they censored and Dr. Meryl Nass's license suspended, pulled away from her, but they were all either threatened with or were incarcerated in the psych ward of a hospital and forced medication simply because they dissented or told the truth. And, you know, I'm going to say laymen have no clue that this actually goes on. And right now I'm dealing with, my mother has just been diagnosed for the last year, or back in January, she was diagnosed with dementia. And she's in stage 4 dementia. So she can't take care of herself. But we cannot find a way to force her into long-term care. And yet the government, because you told the truth or dissented from their agenda, they can come in and throw you into a psych ward and hold you there and force medication into you. And there's literally nothing wrong other than having an opposing opinion. But people who actually have mental health issues cannot take care of themselves. Your hands are tied legally. We can't get her into a hospital or a long-term care facility that will take care of her unless she consents, but she doesn't have the mental capability to even consent. So she's still at home. Does this make any sense to you?
No, it does not, but it doesn't surprise me either, unfortunately. But perhaps if someone with dementia were to say also that 9/11 was an inside job, they would find the quicker track towards getting hospitalized. It's sickening. And of course, obviously in Canada, I guess now they'll probably just usher you into MAID rather than actually give you any sort of psychiatric care.
Which is happening, yeah. Did Thomas Zaz come up while you're doing all your research on this?
I've definitely talked about him before. He wasn't in this particular documentary, but yes,
okay.
I remember his research. And if I recall correctly, that was the professor who ran that experiment where he had a bunch of his students essentially get themselves admitted to psychiatric hospitals by going for a psychiatric assessment and saying, "I just keep hearing the word thud in my mind." And that was what they were told to say. That was the only symptom of whatever. And I think, if not every single one of them, I think most of the students anyway, did end up getting psychiatric, put in a psychiatric ward and force medicated as a result of that. And of course, it was a big expose at the time and a big wake up call for those who believe that, again, this is some sort of, this is science. And there's obviously a proper procedure for diagnosing mental illness. Well, no, it is fundamentally a political diagnosis.
Absolutely.
And I talk about that, but I do talk about in the documentary, for example, the American Psychiatric Association, the APA, and their diagnostic Bible, the DSM, which is, again, just a compendium of largely political diagnoses, including such things as oppositional defiant disorder. Essentially, children who don't like authority and don't listen to authority are now, these days, diagnosed with ODD and put on medication.
Yes. Yeah. And you were pointing out that in that book, most of the people on those committees that were helping to put this book together, they're all associated with pharmaceutical companies. And it's amazing how many times it comes back to pharmaceutical companies, right? So now, Zaz's thing is all of this stuff is a myth. You can't medicate or use a doctor for something that is some sort of emotional anxiety issue. And it's a stress over trauma, and all these mental diseases are made up. They're not even real. And that was his big thing. And it just goes to show that they're using that as a way to, advance pharma and sell drugs, but also in your end where they're weaponizing it as well. And the whole thing is just largely a scam, all of it.
Yeah. One of the people who is in the documentary is Dr. Bruce Levine. He wrote a book called Resisting Illegitimate Authority. He is a credentialed practicing psychologist who is essentially a renegade from his profession because he's called this out for decades now. And if people are interested, they can go back. I've done a few interviews with him over the years talking about these very problems. For example, just as one example, the myth that depression, etc., is caused by a chemical imbalance, and these medications will solve the chemical imbalance. As he points out, not even the APA or anyone in the higher ranks of any of these associations actually does or ever did believe the chemical imbalance theory, and now no one actually forwards it as a genuine theory for what these medications are doing or how they operate. But most of the people in the public, if you ask them, will believe, oh yeah, there's some sort of chemical imbalance, and if you take Prozac or whatever it is, it'll sort out that chemical imbalance. So he's talked about issues like that, as well as the alternatives to medication that do exist for people with genuine psychological issues and distress, which of course do exist. And there are dementia and other conditions that obviously do exist. But the question is, what do we do about those conditions? And if the answer is simply to pop more pills that are being created by people who are associated with companies that also happen to sit on various advising committees that are creating the diagnoses that are then medicated with these pills. I mean, obviously, there is something deeply broken with the system at that point.
Well, recently I hurt my arm and had to go. I've had ultrasounds, X-rays, trying to figure out what we need to do to heal it. And we were sent to a physiotherapist. And this so goes in line with what you were saying. They just want to push a drug at you. They don't ask you about your diet. They don't ask you about your exercise. They don't ask you anything. The doctor came in, spent literally 3 minutes with us, and it might not even have been that long. That might be me being very generous on her time. And immediately she wanted to cortisol shot me and write me a prescription. And I was like, but I just hurt my arm. One, I'm not going to take your prescription. Two, I don't think I need a cortisol shot. I think I've just, the ultrasound and the X-ray report just said I've torn something. So what do I need to do to help heal that tear faster? Do I need to put my arm in a sling? Do I need to stop using it? Do I need to do certain exercises? And she was like, oh, you're not going to take the drugs. Without even asking me, one, if I was even on any other medication to even take the drugs that she wanted to give me. And I said, no, I'm not interested in taking the drugs. I said, we take ginger and turmeric already for inflammation. And she was like, okay. And she got up and she left the room, and we were left there going,
yeah, exactly.
Okay, now what? And then her assistant came in, handed us a pamphlet and said, do exercises 6 to 10 for your right arm. And I'm like, but I'm here for my left arm. Oh yeah, do exercises 1 to 5 for your left arm. They didn't even go over how to do the exercises properly, nothing. They just gave me the handbook and see you later, because I refused the prescription.
Yep.
So
is this that famous Canadian healthcare system that all Canadians are so proud of?
Yeah,
exactly.
That's it.
Didn't cost us a thing.
No, but it goes to show how it was worth it. It goes to show that doctors nowadays are drug pushers. They're not actually healthcare providers. They're not interested in getting us healthy. They're not interested in counseling or actual therapy. They just want to give you medication, because every time they write a prescription, they get a commission. And that's what our healthcare system has come down to. And that's what that DMS Bible is all about. Instead of treating people for their trauma, their emotional distress, we're only too happy to give it a label, increase the amount of medical or mental disorders, give it a drug, and call it a day. There, we fix the human race. It's crazy.
One of the crazy things about it is that to some extent, such things probably do work, because at the very least of the placebo effect. And again, I think people don't put enough stock in the fact that it is genuinely, in fact, even as they've shown, the placebo effect even holds, even if you know and are told you are being given a placebo, you will still have better outcomes in a lot of cases. So whatever mentally is happening is probably much more powerful than most people would give credit for. But that's because we are in this allopathic cut and burn system, where the only things that doctors know how to do is cut, burn, and give big pharma pharmaceuticals. And if people want to know how and why that system came about, over top of the homeopathic or naturopathic system, they might want to look into my How Big Oil Conquered the World documentary, where I talk about the way that the current allopathic system was founded and funded and made into existence by the Carnegies and the Rockefellers on the back of the Flexner Report, etc. There's a rich history there that shows that John D. Rockefeller Sr. had his own personal homeopath and took homeopathic medicine, but he wanted you, of course, to go to the doctors who are certified under the American Medical Association that have only learned to cut, burn, and give big oil pharmaceuticals.
Exactly right. Yeah. I mean, I've seen a lot of that, but at the same time, if it's all in one place, that's a good place to start, because it opens your eyes to a lot of stuff. But just going back to your documentary for a minute, the idea of throwing political dissidents in jail is not new. That's been going on for a very long time with every tyrannical government, whether you want to label it communist, fascist, whatever. It's been going on for a long time. Get rid of the thinkers, get rid of the dissidents, get rid of the artists, and get rid of the religious leaders, and Bob's your uncle. But with the new technological advances, with algorithms. Now, I don't know what it's like in where you're at, but here in Canada, our government is clamping down. These bills, these censorship bills are coming out, but they're already working with tech companies to lower and censor and adjust the narrative that they want. So it's already happening. It's been happening for years, and it's coming from the government. It's not coming from tech.
Or the UN to the government to us.
Right. So is there much need to throw people in prison anymore? Do they have the technology so clamped down at this point
that they don't need to use psychiatry as a weapon?
Yeah, that's sort of where I'm getting at. What's shifted lately?
Well, it is a good point that I think the mechanism of control is fundamentally changing towards, as I talked about in our last conversation, the technocratic state. And there are now technocratic solutions to some of these social engineering / population manipulation programs that have been run in the past. Now, they have, many of them, a psychological backing and undergirding. For example, I recently reposted to my YouTube channel, which has recently resurfaced mysteriously. But I reposted a conversation I had a year or two ago with Ben Pyle about behavioral sciences and how they were used, obviously, during the scamdemic to nudge people in certain directions, lockdowns, and to accept and medical intervention, etc. So I think there is psychological tools that are being used to manipulate people into things like that. But as you say, so much of our lives are now technology dependent that really is the choke point for discourse at this point. If you want to talk to people beyond the people in your physical proximity, you're going to be online doing it. And if they can control that discourse and shape it, not only through outright censorship, although that exists, obviously, and the fact that my YouTube channel was taken away for 4 years probably speaks towards that. But hey, now my YouTube channel is back. Why is that? Well, one thing I have noticed is that even though all 500 and whatever, 60,000 or whatever it is of my subscribers were restored, theoretically, I now tend to get a fraction of the viewership that I was getting before the channel was taken down. Why is that? Oh, of course, the algorithmic censorship or manipulation that takes place. And I think, although when you say it, I think a lot of people understand it. I don't think a lot of people consciously understand how much of their life is right now being tailored algorithmically for them.
Right.
But if they want to get a handle on that, there was a very, very interesting and informative inside Google video. It was made internally at Google and was leaked out several years ago, called The Selfish Ledger, which was essentially the Google tech nerds talking to each other about how they will be able to essentially manipulate the human race, the genome itself, in a way, by implanting ideas in people's heads, by manipulating what they are seeing and the information that they are getting, by essentially manipulating the algorithms. They will be able to steer the human race. And this is the type of thing that they're talking about internally with each other. But I think most people, the average person on the street, just does not have any conception of it. And they just, whatever. I'm looking at YouTube. These are the videos that are on today. And I'm looking at Twitter, and this is the news that is happening today. And do not understand how much of that is being shaped for them.
So with that, it takes us back to you're talking about this secondary psychopath and how those traits can be learned. So it takes us back to the nature versus nurture and how much is what. If only 4% of the population is born your natural psychopath, then 96% of the population very easily could be algorithmically turned into secondary psychopaths if that is all they are constantly seeing.
And can anyone doubt that that is what is happening, especially in the past couple of decades of social media? There is obviously a correlation between the rise in social media and the degradation of public morals. And there is something to the fact that discourse is broken down in a lot of different ways. And I would say it's because we are told that you can look at Piers Morgan talking to Nick Fuentes, and that is the conversation that we're having these days. And why would you want to think or look at anything else? Whatever. The TFM report. Oh no, come on. Corbett report. No. This is what you guys want. This is the energy that you guys have to feed into. So I think again, it's it's a problem as always. As always, this is just a fact of human nature. If we don't see the problem, then we can't even understand that it is a problem. And if you don't see that you are not being shown all of this because you are being shown this, not one person in 1,000 is going to stop to consciously think about that.
Not a lot, no. And my suspicion at this point is that X is run by AI completely. It's, I mean, real users. There's real people on there, but they all applaud Elon Musk for buying X and saving free speech. And I have a feeling that was just his way of getting AI in there to test but so I think the narratives are completely run like a symphony. They just pull the strings, and it's AI that's running that narrative. That's my suspicion. It's not really even people at the helm there anymore. And so there's a crafty thing to kind of get into, but the idea that people see what they're told to see now. They only get what they're allowed to see, and that's where it's suspicious for me that you see the rise of these young social media stars that are so big on politics and everybody loves them, and they came out of nowhere 6 months ago, and all of a sudden they rise to the top. That's a red flag right away.
Yeah, maybe I'm just an old, out of touch man, but yeah, I see these people coming up that have been around for 6 months, who suddenly have these followings of millions of people and are not saying anything that's particularly new to me. Why? How did they suddenly? And now they're being promoted everywhere. That's odd, isn't it?
It is very red flaggy.
100%. And, you know, Chris and I say that all the time. Oh, this person's video went viral, but they're talking about stuff we talked about 3 years ago. And they've got how many followers? How did that happen? How come their video is still going and ours was censored and shut down, and we were kicked off of this platform and that platform for saying the same thing? So yeah, it goes back to weaponry of the psychopaths that are currently in charge, and it's. I don't know.
And then think about how that feeds into the secondary sociopathy, because everyone else who isn't part of that, special class that's being algorithmically promoted looks at the people who are being algorithmically promoted and says, well, whatever they're talking about, the way that they're presenting, what they're doing, that must be the way to do it, because obviously they're very successful. And so people just naturally start adopting those practices and becoming more like it. And again, the algorithm in a way is shaping who we are, because again, the noticeable drop in attention spans over the past couple of decades is obviously being fueled by such decisions as YouTube coming up with YouTube Shorts to counter TikTok or whatever, and promoting those sorts of videos. So more and more people begin to adopt the brain rot 2-second attention span and adopt that as their method of communication, so that long form conversations like this one, who has time for that? No, I want to listen to a 2-minute video.
Well, and the thing is, the rise in entertainment right now is coming out of India and Asia, and the rise is meteoric. Like it's gone from 100% to 1,000% in the last year, and these are these mini dramas. So they'll do a whole season. It's one story over a whole season, but every episode is a minute long. So it's 100 episodes. And this is just taking off like wildfire right now, especially with the young Asian girls, and it's like soap opera. But this is long form in 1 minute bits, not just shorts, right? And this is the next wave of entertainment right now, and it just speaks to that made up ADHD thing, right?
Well, not only that, I just got an email today inviting me to a UN COP 30 talk, or it was a talk that happened at COP 30. But tomorrow, this email newsletter that we managed to get on back in 2023, because we pretended to be something we weren't, to get into UN SDG New York Summit Week, and we got into a bunch of meetings. And since then, they now send me emails all the time. And so I got an email inviting me tomorrow, tomorrow's the 9th, into a UN entertainment summit on how we can now manipulate the masses through entertainment. And they're going to teach us tomorrow how to do this. So I'm like, wow, I'm not going to miss that one. I'd be happy to share the link with you if you want to see.
I'll be interested to see that myself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
so
we'll pop you the link. You can go.
So it is a huge agenda. It is happening, whether people want to believe it or not. But I loved how you ended the Descent into Madness documentary with, we need to mold what we want to see, because if one person is brave enough to stand up and say no, it will encourage everybody else to stand up and say no. Mm-hmm. So we're being inundated with I don't know, what do you want to call it, immoral, psychopathic behaviors. And they want us to model that so we all become secondary psychopaths. But if we just stand up and say no and start modeling something different, we actually have an opportunity to make this world a better place and possibly get out of this tyrannical oppression age that we're in. I thought that was really encouraging. And you also have courses that people can go on to help, I guess. Do you want
to learn?
Yes, exactly right. So for people who are interested, the documentary ends on, I hope, a hopeful note, a genuine note of genuine hope and what people can be doing about this. And I also note that there is at opensourceeducation.online, which is a website that I'm running that has organized some of my past material. I have nearly 2 decades of material now into various courses of study, like history, like economics, like psychology. So I've released a psychology course that has some of the best episodes that I have in my archives, including the Dissent into Madness documentary, but others besides on this subject. And I talk about various things that will empower people into changing the world rather than simply letting the world change them. And so if people are interested in that course and what's in it, I did an episode of my Solutions Watch series called Escaping the Madhouse that people can watch. It gives an overview and gives you a taste of some of what's in the course. By the way, the course is completely for free. It's literally just the material from my website. So it's completely available for free. People can purchase a download if they want to support the work, but they don't have to. But one of the things that I point to in that Escaping the Madhouse episode of Solutions Watch is one of the episodes of Solutions Watch that is in this psychology course. It's called The Bystander Effect. And it's essentially drilling down on this idea that we're talking about. Essentially, the idea is when you're in an emergency situation, most people will, if they see other people walking by, or if they see someone else attending to the emergency, I don't need to do anything. I'll just continue walking on by. It isn't. So in an emergency situation, the best thing to do is to signal, hey, I need help. Can you please do this? Can you do that? Can you help with this? That is the actual way to actually get help in an emergency. Well, what about in a societal emergency? What can we do? And so I have some ideas on that. But that episode ends with a particular video that I've played a few times, but if people haven't seen it, they need to see it. It is a video called First Follower: Leadership Lessons from Dancing Guy. And it's up on YouTube. Yes. It's been up for a long time. It's such a powerful video because it is the perfect visual encapsulation of this idea. Long story short, at some music festival, most people are just sitting on the grass listening to this, folk music or whatever it is, and they're enjoying it. But there's one guy out there who's really enjoying it and doing this crazy dance. And you see the person filming it is kind of laughing like, look at this crazy guy. But someone else from the crowd comes and joins in with the crazy dancing guy and starts doing the crazy dance. And suddenly you get to literally watch as a few people come and join, and a few more, and a few more, and a few more, until eventually literally everyone in this festival is all up on and doing this crazy dance. How on earth did that start? And it's such a great video because it points it out step by step exactly how that started. The crazy dancing guy was doing the crazy dance and modeling that. But actually, the person who really started the movement was the first follower, the first person who came and signaled, hey, you know what? This is fun. I'm going to join in. And he was embraced as an equal. It wasn't about leaders or anything. They were just doing it together. And it was that moment of, hey, this is fun. This is something I can do, that got more and more and more and more people to join in. And I think there's a profound lesson in there about obviously not just dancing, but about the societal problems that we're facing. And that's the kind of thing that I hope people will find and discover through that psychology course.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, if you don't know how to lead, at least get in and join in and support, and yeah, be part of the movement. And then jump into your own stuff after that. But yeah, that's amazing.
Well, the power of
Yeah.
one, right? The power of one just takes one person to say no, one person to start the dance, one person to boo, or one person to hug. And next thing you know, the world is changing, and everybody wants to be part of a tribe, and sort of that mob mentality takes over. And hopefully, if you're doing things in a morally positive way, then we will start to see that domino effect of positivity actually roll out and give our children a much better future than what they're currently looking at.
That's it. And this is a message of empowerment. Not unlike the message of disempowerment that we're constantly hearing from the media, that your place is to vote for a better politician to try to solve things, or whatever the case may be. You're just spectators out there. No, we're the adults in the room that are doing things. No, we are all participants in this, and your little act of resistance, whatever that may be, and you're standing up for the truth in whatever thing that you do today, might be the thing that somebody else sees that you don't know. You'll never know, but maybe they go off and they repeat that act of resistance somewhere else, and it becomes the ripple that starts to become this societal change. And that's what we have to understand. We do have power, and what we do does matter. So I hope people will at least take that out of this conversation.
Yeah, well, James, as usual, I spent an hour trying to throw facts at you and see if I could stump you on something, and as usual, I cannot. It's always amazing to have somebody so well researched on the show. It's always a great conversation. Dissent into Madness, well worth your time. It's very, very poignant in learning how societies are manipulated, but also how the psychiatric system is used as a weapon. It's one of those important documentaries that you've got to learn, got to watch and understand and learn.
But even just the studies that you put in there, a lot of us have seen the studies, heard of the studies, but the studies stop where the agenda wants you to stop at. It doesn't go into the other parts of the study, which is what gives us hope for humanity, and gives us that understanding that only 4% of the world was born psychopathic. Therefore, 96% of us have a moral backbone. We just need to stand up, stop being afraid, stop living in fear, start living in love, and start living in a place of positivity. And, we can change our algorithms. We know that they're monkeying with them, and they want you to see the fights and the horribleness in this world. But if you start searching for positivity and then liking positivity, you'll start to see more of that, and you'll be amazed how much lighter your shoulders will feel at the end of the day.
Right. Well, also just have a potluck. Just have people to your house and talk to them face to face, and it's the old adage.
That's the radical idea. Yeah.
That is the radical. Now it is. Yeah. But it's the old adage. These psychopaths are more afraid of you than you are of them. And once you learn that, then their day is done. So thank you for coming on. I know you got to get going, but definitely go to CorbettReport.com. We've been running your links all night, and go see
watch
the new
Dissent into Madness.
Dissent into Madness,
so
and then get lost in the 1,000 rabbit holes that you can go down on that website. Amazing work. Thanks, James. As always, great information and great work. Thank you for your contribution.
Thank you for having me on. Keep doing what you guys do.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay. Well, we'll try and stump you next time if we have you on. Okay. Good night. Thanks for coming.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.